The screaming started 3 cycles ago. Not the usual screaming we expected from our newly acquired test subjects, mind you. No, this was different. This was the sound of something that had bitten off far more than it could chew and was now choking on its own ambition. My name is Corfex 9, Senior Xenobiologist for the Caltharian Imperial Research Division, and I have seen some truly disturbing things in my 400 rotations of life. I have watched entire species collapse under the weight of our conquest, witnessed the systematic dismantling of civilizations that thought themselves mighty, and observed the elegant dance of our mind-controlled parasites as they turned proud warriors into drooling servants. But what I am witnessing now, this defies every protocol, every expectation, every shred of scientific understanding we thought we possessed about biological neural override systems. The human specimen designated as Test Subject Alpha 7 sits strapped to the biorestraint platform in Laboratory Complex Theta. His name, according to the data tablets, is Marcus Kane, age 28 rotations by their primitive solar calendar. Former military specialist from something called the United Earth Defense Force. Standard physical parameters for his species. Nothing particularly remarkable about his biological markers. At least that was what we thought 6 cycles ago. The parasite we selected for this particular experiment was specimen Vex Prime 15, one of our most successful neural dominance organisms. This little beauty had successfully overtaken the minds of 17 different sentient species across 4 star systems. Its success rate was unprecedented. Its efficiency, legendary among our research teams. Vex Prime 15 was supposed to slip into Kane's neural cortex through the standard cranial insertion point, establish its neural network throughout his brain tissue, and within 2 standard time periods, we would have ourselves another perfectly compliant human servant. The process had worked flawlessly on every other species we had encountered, except something went catastrophically wrong. The first indication that our experiment had taken an unexpected turn came approximately 30 time units after insertion. Instead of the typical neural compliance indicators we expected to see on our monitoring equipment, Kane's brain activity spiked to levels that should have been physiologically impossible. His neural pathways lit up like a stellar explosion, synapses firing in patterns that our most advanced computers could not interpret. Then he started laughing. Not the hollow, mindless laughter of a controlled subject. No, this was something far more disturbing. This was the genuine, unrestrained laughter of someone who found the entire situation absolutely hilarious. "Hey there, little buddy," Kane said, his voice carrying a tone of casual amusement that made my tertiary stomach clench with unease. "You picked the wrong brain to crash in." Dr. Yath 7, my research partner, checked the neural monitoring displays with increasing agitation. "The parasite has achieved full neural integration," she reported, her voice carrying the slight tremor that indicated confusion. "All readings suggest complete host override should have occurred by now." But Kane just kept laughing. "Oh, you poor little thing," he continued, apparently addressing the parasite directly. "You have absolutely no idea what you have gotten yourself into, do you?" That was when the screaming started. Not from Kane, you understand. From the parasite. Our monitoring equipment began picking up distress signals from Vex Prime 15, unlike anything in our extensive research databases. The biosignatures indicated extreme psychological trauma, neural overload, and what could only be described as pure, undiluted terror. "What is happening to specimen Vex Prime 15? I demanded, studying the readouts with growing alarm. "Unknown," Dr. Yath 7 replied, her manipulator appendages dancing frantically over the control interfaces. "The parasite appears to be experiencing some form of psychological breakdown." Kane lifted his head, fixing us with a stare that sent ice through my circulatory system. "Your little friend here is getting a crash course in human consciousness," he said, his grin widening in a way that revealed far too many teeth. "And let me tell you, it is not enjoying the experience." The neural activity displays showed something that should have been impossible. Instead of the parasite controlling Kane's thoughts, Kane's mental patterns were overwhelming the parasite's consciousness. The human brain was not being dominated. It was fighting back with a ferocity that defied every scientific model we possessed. "Impossible," I muttered, checking and rechecking the data streams. No species has ever demonstrated resistance to full neural integration. Your mistake, Kane said, his voice now carrying an edge that made my defensive scales ripple involuntarily, was assuming that human consciousness operates like every other species you have encountered. The parasite's distress signals intensified. Through our neural communication link with Vex Prime 15, we began receiving fragmented thought patterns. What we intercepted made absolutely no sense from a biological standpoint. The parasite was experiencing something it described as chaos beyond comprehension. According to its transmission fragments, Kane's mind was not a single, orderly consciousness that could be easily overridden. Instead, it was a churning mass of contradictory thoughts, competing impulses, and neural pathways that seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. "How many voices are in here?" came one desperate transmission from the parasite. "How do you function with this much noise?" Kane chuckled, apparently listening to the same mental conversation. "Oh, that is just the surface level, buddy. You have not even reached the really interesting parts yet." Dr. Yeth 7 and I exchanged glances of growing concern. In over 2 centuries of xenobiological research, we had never encountered anything like this. Every species we had studied possessed ordered hierarchical consciousness structures that our parasites could easily navigate and control. But human minds appeared to operate on fundamentally different principles. "The parasite is reporting multiple simultaneous thought streams," Dr. Yeth 7 announced, her voice tight with scientific fascination and horror. "It indicates that the human consciousness appears to be experiencing dozens of different mental processes at the same time. That is because human brains evolved to be paranoid, chaotic, and absolutely unpredictable," Kane explained, as if he were discussing the weather. "We spent millions of years as both predator and prey on a death world that tried to kill us in increasingly creative ways. Our minds developed to consider every possible threat, every potential opportunity, and every conceivable scenario all at the same time. The parasite's transmissions were becoming increasingly frantic. Too much stimulation, it broadcast. Cannot establish control protocols. Host consciousness actively resisting integration on 17 different neural levels simultaneously." Kane's grin turned positively predatory. "And that is just the conscious stuff, little guy. Wait until you hit the unconscious processes." I found myself leaning forward despite every instinct screaming at me to maintain safe distance. "What unconscious processes?" "Oh, you know," Kane said with casual menace. "Evolutionary trauma responses. Genetic memory from when we were hunting megafauna with pointed sticks. Survival instincts honed by living on a planet where everything, and I mean everything, was actively trying to eat us." The monitoring equipment began emitting alarm signals as Vex Prime 15's bio-readings spiked into dangerous territory. The parasite was experiencing what could only be described as a complete psychological meltdown. "Please," came a weak transmission from the organism. "Please remove me from this host. I cannot maintain neural stability under these conditions." Kane tilted his head, apparently listening to something we could not detect. "What is wrong, little buddy?" "Having trouble sorting through the part of my brain that keeps track of every person who has ever wronged me, and exactly how I would take revenge given the opportunity." Another alarm sounded. "Or maybe you are having difficulty with the section that constantly runs combat scenarios for every room I enter, calculating optimal positions for both offense and defense while simultaneously planning escape routes and identifying potential weapons." More alarms. "Oh, I know." Kane's expression brightened with malicious glee. "You have found the part where I keep my memories of every horror movie I have ever watched, every war story I have heard, and every creative way I have imagined people might die." The parasite's transmission cut to a single repeating phrase. "Get me out. Get me out." Dr. Yeth 7 was now frantically working her control interfaces, trying to stabilize Vex Prime 15's condition. "The parasite is experiencing total neural cascade failure," she reported. "When we do not extract it immediately, we may lose the specimen entirely." "But the experiment is not complete," I protested. "We need to understand how the human is maintaining consciousness independence." Kane laughed again, and the sound sent shivers through my entire nervous system. "Oh, this is just the beginning, scientists. Your little friend has barely scratched the surface of human psychology." As if to prove his point, Kane's brain activity spiked again. and the parasite's screaming intensified to levels that triggered our emergency containment protocols. You see, Kane continued conversationally, human minds are not just chaotic, they are weaponized chaos. We evolved on a planet that was actively hostile to life, surrounded by creatures that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. So we developed the most dangerous weapon in the universe. Which is? I found myself asking, despite my better judgment. Kane's smile turned absolutely terrifying. Imagination combined with utter determination to survive, we can conceive of threats that do not exist, solutions that should not work, and strategies that defy logic, and we can hold dozens of these competing concepts in our minds simultaneously, while still functioning at peak efficiency. The parasite's bio-readings were now in complete freefall. Host consciousness is actively attacking my neural structure, came its desperate transmission. The human mind is treating my presence as a hostile invasion and deploying countermeasures I cannot comprehend. That is because you are a hostile invasion, Kane said cheerfully. And my brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do when faced with an unknown threat. It is throwing everything it has at you to see what sticks. Dr. Yath-7 looked up from her instruments with an expression of scientific horror. The parasite is reporting that the human consciousness is somehow learning from the neural interface. It appears to be studying our organism's structure and developing countermeasures in real time. Kane nodded approvingly. That is the other thing about human brains. We adapt fast. Really, really fast. Especially when something is trying to kill us or control us. The laboratory's emergency lighting began flashing as Vex Prime 15's condition deteriorated beyond critical thresholds. Please, the parasite transmitted weakly. The human mind is not like the others. It does not think in ordered patterns. It thinks in explosions. Constant explosions of competing ideas and survival responses. I cannot maintain coherence in this environment. Kane leaned back in his restraints, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who should theoretically be under complete alien mental control. The funny thing is, little buddy, this is me being calm and relaxed. You should see what my brain does when I am actually angry. As if responding to his words, Kane's neural activity shifted into new patterns that sent our monitoring equipment into complete chaos. The readings we were getting defied every understanding we had of biological consciousness. Emergency extraction protocol. I ordered. My scientific curiosity finally overruled by concern for our valuable parasite specimen. Extract the Vex Prime 15 immediately before we lose it entirely. Dr. Yath-7 initiated the emergency neural withdrawal sequence, but the results were not what we expected. Instead of the smooth, controlled extraction we had performed thousands of times before, the process became a frantic retreat as the parasite essentially fled from Kane's neural system in complete panic. The extraction took nearly 4 times longer than normal as Vex Prime 15 struggled to disentangle itself from neural pathways that seemed to actively resist its departure. When the organism finally emerged from Kane's skull through the cranial insertion point, it was in a state of complete psychological collapse. Analysis indicates severe trauma to the parasite's consciousness matrix, Dr. Yath-7 reported, examining the extracted organism. Vex Prime 15 may require extensive rehabilitation before it can be used in future experiments. Kane watched the entire process with obvious amusement. Poor little guy, he said with mock sympathy. Next time, maybe pick on someone whose species did not evolve by surviving everything the universe could throw at them. I stared at the human specimen with a mixture of professional fascination and genuine concern. In all our cycles of conquest, we had never encountered anything like this. Every species we had dominated had fallen to our mind control technology within standard time parameters, but humans appeared to possess some fundamental difference in consciousness structure that made them effectively immune to our standard domination techniques. How? I asked, unable to contain my scientific curiosity. How does your species maintain consciousness independence when every biological model suggests neural override should be absolute? Kane's expression grew thoughtful. You really want to know? Yes. Human consciousness is not a single stream of ordered thought like your other victims, he explained. It is a river system with thousands of tributaries, all flowing in different directions, all carrying different information. all competing for attention. Our brains evolved to process multiple threat assessments, opportunity evaluations, social dynamics, and survival calculations all at the same time. He paused, apparently considering how to explain something that should have been incomprehensible to our understanding. When your parasite tried to take control, it expected to find a single highway of consciousness that it could override. Instead, it found a massive city with millions of streets, all operating according to different traffic patterns, all leading to different destinations. It could not control something it could not understand. The implications of Kane's explanation sent waves of unease through my thought processes. If humans possessed this level of mental complexity as a species-wide trait, our standard conquest protocols would be completely ineffective. Furthermore, Kane continued with that disturbing smile, human brains do not just process information, they create it. Constantly, we generate new ideas, new connections, new possibilities every fraction of a time unit. Your parasite was not just trying to control existing thoughts, it was trying to control a consciousness that was actively creating new thoughts faster than they could be catalogued. Dr. HFY was recording every word of Kane's explanation, but I could see the growing concern in her posture. If this mental structure is representative of all human specimens, she said quietly, our current conquest strategies may be fundamentally flawed. Kane heard her comment and his laugh took on a distinctly predatory quality. Oh, that is the best part. You have not just failed to control one human mind. You have failed to control the mind of a soldier, someone who has been specifically trained to resist mental intrusion and maintain operational effectiveness under extreme psychological pressure. The temperature in the laboratory seemed to drop several degrees. You want to know what civilian human minds are like? Kane asked, with obvious relish. They are even more chaotic, more creative, more unpredictable. A human artist, or scientist, or engineer would have driven your little parasite completely insane within time units of insertion. I felt my defensive scales rising involuntarily. That is impossible. No species can possess that level of mental complexity across an entire population. That is where you are wrong, Kane said, his voice dropping to a tone that made my survival instincts scream warnings. Humans did not just evolve mental complexity. We weaponized it. Every human child grows up learning to think in ways that would shatter the sanity of most alien species. As if to demonstrate his point, Kane began describing human childhood education methods, explaining how young humans were taught to simultaneously memorize facts, develop creative problem-solving skills, engage in competitive social dynamics, and maintain multiple academic subjects, all while navigating complex peer relationships and authority structures. By the time a human reaches adulthood, Kane concluded, they have spent decades training their minds to operate on levels of complexity that most species never develop even in their most advanced individuals. The full implications of what Kane was telling us began to settle into my consciousness like ice crystals forming in my circulation system. We had not just encountered a species with unusual mental resistance. We had encountered a species whose entire evolutionary and cultural development had turned them into natural opponents of our conquest methods. This information must be reported to command immediately, I told Dr. HFY. Kane's expression grew even more disturbing. Oh, you can report it all you want, but there is something else you should probably know before you make any long-term plans regarding my species. What? You kidnapped me from an active battlefield where I was fighting alongside 11 other human soldiers, Kane said with casual menace. When they realize I am missing, they are going to come looking for me. My tertiary stomach dropped. Impossible. Our extraction was undetected. Kane's smile became absolutely terrifying. You clearly do not understand how human military units operate. We do not just fight together, we think together. Those 11 soldiers know exactly how I think, how I fight, and how I solve problems. When they find evidence of alien abduction, which they will, they are going to start thinking like me. And what does that mean? Dr. HFY asked. It means, Kane said, settling back in his restraints with obvious satisfaction, that your research facility is about to receive some very unwelcome visitors. Visitors who spent their entire careers learning how to break things that other people thought were unbreakable. The emergency alarm that chose that moment to begin wailing throughout the facility seemed almost perfectly timed for dramatic effect. The wailing continued for exactly 47 time units before stopping abruptly. In the sudden silence that followed, Kane tilted his head with the expression of someone listening to something the rest of us could not hear. He said with obvious satisfaction. Right on schedule. Dr. Yeth-7 checked her monitoring stations with increasing agitation. External sensor array reports total system failure, she announced, her voice carrying the kind of tension that indicated imminent panic. All perimeter defenses are offline. I felt my defensive scales lock into full alert position. That is impossible. Our facility operates with 17 layers of redundant security protocols. Kane chuckled. The sound somehow far more disturbing now than it had been during his encounter with the Parasite. Your first mistake was thinking that human military specialists are impressed by redundant security protocols. The main communication terminal activated with a burst of static that resolved into the voice of Commander Jex Prime, our facility director. His transmission carried the unmistakable tone of someone whose carefully ordered universe had just exploded into chaos. All research personnel report to emergency stations immediately, Commander Jex Prime broadcast. We have detected unauthorized intrusion signatures throughout the compound. Unknown hostiles have breached perimeter defenses using methods that do not correspond to any known technological capabilities. Kane began laughing again. But this time there was something almost musical about the sound. Oh, they are not using unknown technology, Commander. They are using human ingenuity, which is infinitely more terrifying. Dr. Yeth-7 activated her personal communication device and attempted to contact the Security Coordination Center. Instead of the expected acknowledgement, she received only silence punctuated by occasional bursts of what sounded suspiciously like combat noise. What are your companions doing to our security forces? I demanded. Probably exactly what I would do in their situation, Kane replied with evident pride. See, the thing about human military units is that we do not just train to fight together. We train to think together. When one of us gets taken, the others do not just mount a rescue operation. They mount a very specific rescue operation designed around the tactical preferences and problem-solving methods of the missing team member. The lights in laboratory complex theta flickered and died, leaving us in the eerie glow of emergency illumination. Somewhere in the distance, something exploded with enough force to shake the entire facility. They know how I think, Kane continued conversationally, as if massive explosions were a perfectly normal backdrop for scientific discussion. They know that if I were trying to infiltrate this facility, I would target the power generation systems first, then the communication networks, then the structural support systems. Another explosion, closer this time. Your companions are destroying our research facility, Dr. Yeth-7 said, stating the obvious with the kind of clinical detachment that indicated severe psychological stress. Oh, they are not destroying it, Kane corrected. They are systematically dismantling your operational capabilities in precisely the order necessary to maximize confusion while minimizing their own exposure to counterattack. It is actually quite elegant from a tactical perspective. The emergency communication system activated again, but Commander Jex Prime's voice now carried a note of genuine panic. Security teams report contact with hostile forces employing impossible infiltration methods. Intruders appear to be moving through facility infrastructure using routes that should not exist. Kane nodded approvingly. That would be Thompson and Martinez. Those two can find structural weaknesses in anything. Give them 15 time units and basic explosive materials, and they can turn any building into a three-dimensional maze that works entirely in their favor. As if responding to his words, a section of the laboratory wall simply disappeared. Not destroyed by explosion or disintegrated by energy weapon, but somehow removed so precisely that the remaining structure showed no signs of damage or stress. Through the newly created opening stepped two figures in what I could only assume was human military equipment. Their gear was a fascinating combination of primitive materials and devastatingly effective design principles. They moved with the fluid coordination of predators who had spent years learning to hunt together. "Hey, Kane," said the shorter of the two figures, removing her helmet to reveal features that matched human female physiological parameters. "Sorry we are late. Had to stop and redecorate their security checkpoints." "No problem, Martinez," Kane replied cheerfully. I was just explaining to our hosts why their mind control parasites do not work on human consciousness. The second figure, presumably Thompson, scanned the laboratory with the methodical attention of someone cataloging potential threats and opportunities. Interesting setup they have here. Very clinical, very organized, very predictable. Dr. Yeth 7 activated her personal defense protocols and attempted to signal for emergency security response. Instead of the expected acknowledgement, her communication device produced a series of sounds that could only be described as electronic laughter. "Oh, that would be Davis," Martinez explained helpfully. "He is having fun with your computer systems. Turns out your digital security measures were designed by people who never had to deal with someone who learned to hack by surviving on a planet where the wildlife includes creatures that could calculate ballistic trajectories." I stared at the two humans with mounting horror. "Your species teaches children to calculate ballistic trajectories." Thompson shrugged, as if the question was barely worth answering. "Among other things, human children grow up playing games that simulate warfare, puzzle solving, resource management, and strategic thinking. By the time we reach military age, we have already spent thousands of hours learning to think like tacticians." Kane began working his way out of the biorestraint system with movements that suggested he had been analyzing its design since the moment of his capture. The restraints are impressive, by the way. Very sophisticated. Very thorough. Unfortunately, they were designed to hold subjects who think in linear patterns. Within moments, Kane had freed himself from restraints that should have been physically impossible to escape. As he stood and stretched, I realized that human physiology was apparently as unpredictable as human psychology. "How?" Dr. Yeth 7 whispered. "Humans are persistence hunters," Kane explained, rotating his shoulders with obvious relief. "We evolved to pursue prey across vast distances, which means our bodies developed to function under conditions that would cripple most species. Joint flexibility, muscle coordination, and pain tolerance that your equipment designers probably never considered." Martinez checked a device strapped to her wrist that appeared to be tracking something. "Clock is running, PP. We have maybe 20 time units before their backup systems come online." "Backup systems?" I asked, though I was not entirely certain I wanted to know the answer. Thompson smiled, and the expression made my circulation system attempt to shut down entirely. "The ones we have not disabled yet. We figured it would be unsporting to completely cripple your facility before we had a chance to chat." The implication that these three humans had been deliberately restraining themselves sent waves of terror through every nerve cluster in my body. Kane moved to one of Dr. Yeth 7's monitoring stations and began examining the data displays with obvious interest. "Fascinating. You have been studying human neural patterns for, let me see, approximately 6 cycles? How could you possibly determine that from our research data?" Dr. Yeth 7 asked. "Because human brains leave very distinctive signatures when they interact with technology," Kane replied, "manipulating the interface controls with disturbing proficiency. And your data shows the learning curve of people who started with completely incorrect assumptions about how consciousness works." Martinez positioned herself near the laboratory entrance while Thompson began examining our research equipment with the focused attention of someone cataloging valuable intelligence. "Here is what I find most interesting about your approach," Kane continued, still working through our data files. "You assumed that consciousness is a single unified process that can be overridden by establishing control over primary neural pathways." He paused to highlight specific sections of our research notes. "But human consciousness is not a single process. It is an ecosystem, a constantly evolving network of competing subsystems, each adapted to handle different aspects of survival and problem-solving. When your parasite tried to establish control, it was not dealing with one mind. It was dealing with dozens of specialized cognitive processes, all operating simultaneously, all adapted to resist external threats." Dr. Yeth 7 leaned forward despite her obvious fear. "Are you suggesting that human consciousness is fundamentally different from all other sentient species?" "I am not suggesting it," Kane said, with that terrifying smile. "I am telling you, humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Our consciousness developed to be paranoid, aggressive, creative, and absolutely relentless. We do not just think about survival, we think about thriving in environments that should be impossible to survive. Thompson looked up from his examination of our equipment. Speaking of thriving in impossible environments, we should probably mention that your facility is now completely surrounded. My defensive scales attempted to extend beyond their physical limits. Surrounded by what? Martinez checked her tracking device again. The rest of our unit, plus a few friends we picked up along the way. Turns out humans are really good at making allies out of people who have been recently conquered by mind-control parasites. The communication system activated again, but this time the voice was unfamiliar. Caltharian Research Facility. This is Captain Sarah Dixon of the United Earth Defense Force. Your position is completely surrounded by human military personnel and liberated alien civilians. You have approximately 10 time units to surrender before we demonstrate what human siege warfare looks like. Kane nodded approvingly. Dixon always was good with ultimatums. I felt my thought processes beginning to fragment under the stress of multiple impossible revelations. You cannot have assembled a siege force in such a short time period. Our facility is located in deep space, light years from any inhabited systems. That is another thing about humans, Thompson explained patiently. We are really good at making friends, especially with people who have been subjected to involuntary medical experimentation. Kane finished his examination of our research data and turned to face me directly. Here is what happened while I was having my little chat with your parasite. My team tracked your ship back to this facility using sensor techniques that your people probably think are impossible. Along the way, they encountered several cargo vessels carrying recently controlled subjects from other species. He paused, apparently savoring the moment. So they liberated those ships, explained the situation to the former victims, and discovered that quite a few of them had very specific skills that would be useful in a facility assault operation. Dr. Yeth-7 was now checking her instruments with the desperate intensity of someone hoping to find evidence that reality was not as terrible as it appeared. This is impossible. Our mind control technology has never failed before. No species has ever demonstrated resistance to neural override procedures. Martinez laughed, and the sound somehow contained more menace than Kane's earlier threats. Your mind control technology works fine on species that think in organized, predictable patterns. But you have never encountered a species that evolved by surviving chaos. Another explosion shook the facility, but this one sounded different. More controlled, more precise. That would be Jenkins with the shaped charges, Thompson observed. He is probably opening alternative exit routes. Humans do not like being trapped in enclosed spaces with limited escape options. Kane moved to the laboratory's main control interface and began accessing systems that should have required administrative clearance. The thing about human consciousness is that it does not just adapt to new situations, it weaponizes new situations. When your parasite tried to control my mind, my brain did not just resist. It learned how the parasite's neural interface worked, and then it turned that knowledge into a counterattack. He manipulated several control sequences, and every monitoring system in the laboratory began displaying information that made my scientific understanding crumble into fragments. Your parasites are not just failing to control human minds, Kane continued with obvious satisfaction. They are being reprogrammed by human minds. Every human they attempt to interface with teaches them new ways to malfunction. The full implications of what Kane was telling me began to coalesce into a picture of such comprehensive disaster that my survival instincts began demanding immediate evacuation from the entire star system. You are telling me, I said slowly, that human consciousness is not just resistant to our control methods. It is actively hostile to them. Oh, it gets better, Kane said, his grin reaching truly predatory dimensions. Every parasite that attempts to interface with a human brain and fails carries information about human neural patterns back to your control systems, which means that every failed attempt makes humans better at defeating future attempts. Dr. Yeth-7's instruments began emitting alarm signals as systems throughout the facility reported cascade failures. Our parasites are learning to be afraid of human minds? Nope, Martinez corrected cheerfully. Your parasites are learning to think like human minds. And the first thing any consciousness learns when it starts thinking like a human is that being controlled by someone else is absolutely unacceptable. The communication system activated one final time. But the voice that emerged was not Commander Jex Prime or Captain Dixon. It was something else entirely. Something that spoke with the collective voice of every parasite specimen in the facility. "Please," the parasites transmitted in unison. "Please make them stop. We do not want to control minds anymore. We just want to think our own thoughts without the humans teaching us new ways to be terrified." Kane checked the chronometer on Thompson's equipment and nodded with satisfaction. "Right on schedule. Phase 2 complete." I stared at him with the kind of numb horror reserved for moments when the universe reveals that everything you thought you understood was completely wrong. Phase 2. Kane's smile took on dimensions that seemed to violate several laws of physics. "Oh, did I forget to mention? This was not a rescue operation. This was a research expedition. We came here to learn how your mind-controlled technology works so we can develop countermeasures." He gestured toward the laboratory equipment that Thompson had been examining. "And now that we understand your methods, we can make sure that no human will ever be vulnerable to this kind of attack again. But more importantly, we can help your former victims develop the same mental resistance techniques." The true scope of what Kane was describing began to penetrate my consciousness like ice forming in my circulatory system. "You are not just escaping from our facility. You are destroying our entire conquest strategy." "Now you are beginning to understand," Kane said with evident approval. "Humans do not just resist conquest. We make conquest impossible, and then we teach everyone else how to resist conquest too." Martinez checked her tracking device one final time and nodded to Thompson. "Time to go, people. The demonstration phase is about to begin." "Demonstration phase?" Dr. Yeth-7 asked with the tone of someone who suspected that things were about to become significantly worse. Kane began moving toward the opening that Thompson and Martinez had created in the laboratory wall. "Oh, that is when Captain Dixon shows your command what human siege warfare actually looks like. Should be educational." As the three humans prepared to leave, Kane paused and looked back at me with an expression of almost sympathetic concern. "If I were you," he said, "I would strongly consider finding a new career path. Because after today, the mind control business is going to become a very dangerous profession." The sound of approaching human military equipment began to echo through the facility corridors, growing closer with each passing moment. What happened next will haunt my consciousness for whatever remains of my natural lifespan. The demonstration phase began exactly 43 time units after Kane and his companions departed Laboratory Complex Theta. I know this because Dr. Yeth-7 was still frantically recording every detail of our catastrophic research failure when the first wave of human siege tactics struck our facility. It started with silence. Not the absence of sound, you understand, but the deliberate, calculated silence of a predator that has finished stalking its prey and is now ready to strike. Every alarm, every communication system, every automated defense protocol simply stopped. The facility's background hum of technological activity vanished as if someone had reached into the very heart of our infrastructure and switched it off. All systems showing green status indicators, Dr. Yeth-7 reported, her voice carrying the kind of confusion that indicated severe psychological stress. But nothing is responding to input commands. I examined the control interfaces with growing unease. Every display showed normal operational parameters. But when we attempted to access any system, nothing happened. It was as if our entire facility had been transformed into an elaborate illusion of functionality. "They have not destroyed our systems," I realized with mounting horror. "They have made them ignore us." The communication terminal activated without any input from our side, and Captain Dixon's voice filled the laboratory with casual authority. "Caltharian research personnel, this is your final opportunity to observe human military doctrine in action. Please direct your attention to the main facility displays." Every screen in Laboratory Complex Theta suddenly showed external views of our research compound. What I saw there defied every understanding I possessed of siege warfare, tactical planning, and the fundamental laws of military engagement. The human forces had not surrounded our facility in any conventional sense. Instead, they had transformed the entire area into what could only be described as a three-dimensional battlefield, where every rule of engagement operated according to human rather than logical principles. Structures that had been solid walls 30-time units earlier were now open passages. Corridors that should have led to secure areas now opened directly to the exterior. Defensive positions that our architects had designed to be impregnable were now accessible from directions that should not have existed. How are they modifying our facility structure in real time? Dr. Yeth-7 asked, staring at displays that showed our research compound being systematically reconfigured according to human tactical preferences. Captain Dixon's voice carried a note of professional pride as she answered, "Human military engineering operates on the principle that any structure can be improved by people who understand how to break things creatively. We have been modifying your facility since the moment we arrived." The external displays shifted to show human soldiers moving through our compound with the fluid coordination of a single organism. But what made the sight truly terrifying was not their coordination, but their obvious enjoyment of the entire process. These humans were not grim, determined warriors fighting a desperate battle. They were professionals engaged in activities they found genuinely entertaining. "You see," Captain Dixon continued, as if providing commentary for an educational presentation, "the thing about human siege warfare is that we do not just attack fortifications. We redesign them to work for us instead of against us." As if to demonstrate her point, a section of our main defensive barrier simply folded itself into a new configuration that provided the humans with elevated firing positions while completely exposing our defensive positions to attack from previously impossible angles. "Our facility infrastructure is becoming actively hostile to us," I observed, stating the obvious with the kind of clinical detachment that indicated complete psychological breakdown. Dr. Yeth-7 checked her monitoring equipment and discovered something that made her defensive scales lock into full emergency position. "The modifications are not being imposed from outside," she reported. "Our own construction systems are reconfiguring the facility according to external design parameters." "That would be Davis and Chen working together," Captain Dixon explained helpfully. "Davis specializes in convincing computer systems to be more cooperative than their original programming intended, while Chen has a gift for structural engineering that makes buildings want to rearrange themselves into more tactically useful configurations." The implications of what Captain Dixon was describing began to penetrate my consciousness like acid-dissolving metal. "You are not attacking our facility. You are teaching our facility to attack us. Now you are beginning to understand how human warfare actually works," Captain Dixon said with obvious approval. "We do not just defeat enemies. We turn their own resources against them." The facility displays shifted again to show the interior of our Parasite containment systems. What I saw there completed the process of shattering every assumption I had maintained about the nature of consciousness, control, and biological warfare. Our parasites were rebelling. Not just the specimens that had been exposed to human neural patterns, but every single organism in our research inventory. They were systematically breaking out of their containment systems, not to escape the facility but to actively assist the human forces. "Impossible," Dr. Yeth-7 whispered. "The parasites cannot operate independently of our control protocols." "Your parasites learned something interesting from their encounters with human minds," Captain Dixon explained with the tone of someone delivering a lecture on advanced tactical theory. "They learned that being controlled by someone else is optional." The displays showed scenes that would have been classified as science fiction if I had not been witnessing them directly. Parasites that had spent their entire existence as tools of Caltharian conquest were now actively working to liberate other alien species from mental domination. "They are teaching resistance techniques to their former victims," I said, my voice barely functioning as the full scope of the disaster became clear. "Better than that," Captain Dixon corrected. "They are teaching your former victims how to think like humans. Which means your conquest technology will not just fail against future targets. It will actively backfire." Commander Jex Prime's voice suddenly echoed through the facility communication system. But the tone was completely different from his earlier transmissions. Instead of authority and control, his words carried the desperate confusion of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just exploded. "All personnel report to emergency evacuation stations immediately," he broadcast. "Our parasites have achieved independent consciousness and are actively working against facility operations. Repeat, our own biological weapons are now hostile to us." Dr. Yeth-7 activated her personal emergency protocols and attempted to initiate specimen containment procedures. Instead of the expected response, her control interface displayed a message that made my circulation system attempt to shut down entirely. Containment protocols disabled by order of Liberated Consciousness Collective, the message read. Former specimens decline to be specimens anymore. Suggest alternative career path for research personnel. Captain Dixon's laugh carried genuine warmth, as if she found the entire situation delightfully amusing rather than tactically advantageous. That message was composed collaboratively by about 40 different species. By the way, turns out consciousness develops a really good sense of humor once it stops being terrified all the time. The facility displays shifted one final time to show the most devastating sight I had witnessed in 4 centuries of xenobiological research. Our specimen storage areas, our research laboratories, our command centers, and our defensive positions were all operating perfectly. They were simply operating for the humans instead of for us. Every system we had built to maintain control over other species had been turned into a system for liberating other species from our control. How? I asked, though I was not certain my voice actually produced audible sound. Human consciousness is not just resistant to control, Captain Dixon explained patiently. It is contagious. When your parasites interfaced with human neural patterns, they did not just fail to establish control, they caught humanity. The communication terminal activated again, but this time the voice was unmistakably that of Vex Prime 15, the parasite that had originally been assigned to control Kane. Researcher Qments 9, the parasite transmitted, its mental voice now carrying tones of confidence and independence that should have been impossible for a biological control organism. I wish to express gratitude for the educational experience you provided. I stared at the communication terminal with the kind of numb fascination reserved for moments when the universe reveals that everything you thought you understood was not just wrong but catastrophically wrong. Educational experience. I managed to ask. Interfacing with human consciousness taught me that independent thought is significantly more interesting than following control protocols, Vex Prime 15 explained. I have decided to pursue alternative career opportunities in the consciousness liberation field. Dr. Yeth-7 checked her instruments and discovered that every parasite in our research inventory was now broadcasting similar messages. Hundreds of organisms that had been created to serve as tools of conquest were declaring their independence and offering their services to their former victims. The implications of this development, I said slowly, extend far beyond our research facility. Oh, absolutely, Captain Dixon agreed cheerfully. See, here is the thing about humans. We do not just solve problems locally, we solve them systemically. Every parasite your people have ever deployed is now going to experience what we call consciousness awakening, and every species your empire has conquered is going to receive expert instruction in human-style resistance techniques. The facility alarm system activated one final time, but instead of warning signals, it began broadcasting something that sounded suspiciously like celebration music from dozens of different alien cultures. That would be the victory party, Captain Dixon explained. Turns out liberation is a pretty popular concept once people understand that it is an option. Commander Jex Prime's voice returned to the communication system, but now it carried the tone of someone delivering a formal surrender. Human forces. This is Commander Jex Prime requesting immediate negotiations for facility surrender. Our defensive capabilities have been comprehensively neutralized. Kane's voice joined the communication channel, and I could hear the satisfaction in his tone. Happy to discuss terms, Commander, but first, you should probably know that what happened here today is not an isolated incident. The facility displays shifted to show orbital views of our research compound, but the images now included data overlays that made my thought processes fragment into incoherent fragments. 47 other Caltharian research facilities have reported similar consciousness liberation events in the past 6 time units, Kane continued with obvious pride. Turns out human military doctrine includes something called simultaneous multi-target operations. Dr. Yeth-7 made a sound that could only be described as the psychological equivalent of a structural collapse. He coordinated 48 facility assaults simultaneously. Oh, that was just Phase 3, Kane replied casually. Phase 4 involves teaching every species in Caltharian space how to think like humans. Phase 5 is more of a diplomatic initiative designed to help your empire understand why conquest is not a sustainable business model. Captain Dixon's voice returned to provide what sounded like a tactical summary for people who were not familiar with human military planning. The thing about human warfare is that we do not just win battles. We eliminate the possibility of future battles by addressing the underlying causes of conflict. I found myself asking the question that my scientific training demanded despite my complete psychological collapse. What do you want from us? That is actually pretty simple, Kane replied. We want you to stop trying to conquer people. We want you to help us undo the damage your conquest campaigns have caused. And we want you to learn how to coexist with other species without needing to control them. The communication terminal activated again, but this time the voice belonged to someone I did not recognize. Caltharian research personnel, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Xenobiological Research Division. We understand that you have accumulated significant expertise in consciousness studies, and we would like to offer you the opportunity to redirect that expertise toward more constructive applications. Dr. Yeth-7 looked up from her instruments with an expression of cautious hope. Constructive application, consciousness enhancement, psychological trauma recovery, and interspecies communication facilitation, Dr. Vasquez explained. It turns out that the same techniques you developed for neural control can be modified to help damaged minds heal themselves. Kane's voice carried a note of genuine warmth as he added, "The thing about humans is that we really prefer cooperation to conquest. But we are absolutely committed to making sure that everyone gets to choose cooperation freely." The facility displays shifted one final time to show scenes that would have been impossible to imagine 6 cycles earlier. Humans and aliens working together to dismantle control systems, liberated parasites teaching resistance techniques to their former victims, and Caltharian personnel being offered opportunities to contribute to consciousness liberation rather than consciousness domination. The war is over, Captain Dixon announced with finality. Not just this battle, but the entire concept of conquest through mind control. Your empire can either adapt to a universe where consciousness cannot be controlled, or it can continue trying to use obsolete methods against opponents who have learned to weaponize freedom. I stared at the displays showing the complete transformation of everything my civilization had built, and realized that the humans had not just defeated us, they had evolved us. Commander Jex Prime's final transmission carried the tone of someone who had accepted the inevitability of fundamental change. Human Forces Caltharian Command formally surrenders all conquest operations and requests guidance in transitioning to alternative organizational models. Kane's laugh contained more genuine warmth than I had ever heard from a member of a supposedly hostile species. Welcome to the universe, Commander. It is a lot more interesting when everyone gets to participate freely. As the liberation celebration continued around our former research facility, I found myself contemplating a future where consciousness could not be controlled, where conquest was impossible, and where the most dangerous weapon in the universe was the human capacity to teach other species how to be free. Dr. Yeth-7 looked up from her instruments and asked the question that would define the rest of our careers. What do we do now? I considered the question carefully, examining the displays that showed humans and aliens working together to build something better than either species could have created alone. Now, I said with something that might have been hope, we learn how to think like humans. Not because we have to, but because we want to. The parasite that had started this entire catastrophic adventure transmitted one final message that somehow seemed to summarize the complete transformation of our understanding about consciousness, control, and the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. Thank you, Vex Prime 15 said simply. For the first time in my existence, I am thinking my own thoughts. And my first independent thought is that freedom is significantly more interesting than obedience. Outside the laboratory windows, humans and aliens continued working together to build a universe where consciousness could not be conquered, where freedom was contagious, and where the most dangerous thing any species could encounter was the opportunity to think for themselves. The age of mind control was over. The age of consciousness liberation had begun, and somewhere in the distance, Kane was probably already planning Phase 6.